Welcome back to the General Hospital Insider Report, where today we dive into a week of legal tension, emotional shockwaves, and a parental nightmare unfolding in Port Charles. Inside the courtroom's austere walls, Willow Corinthos stood firm, her expression composed but eyes flickering with the weight of the battle she had committed to fight. It was not just about legal custody, it was about proving to the world, and perhaps to herself, that she could protect her children at all costs. The stakes had never been higher, and for Willow, the courtroom had become a battleground where every word, every piece of testimony, and every glance from the judge held the power to shape her family's future. Her lawyers methodically dismantled the opposition's claims, painting Willow as the epitome of maternal stability, someone who had weathered illness, betrayal, and chaos, yet had never stopped advocating for her children's well-being. But just as the scales of justice seemed to tilt slightly in her favor, a chilling ripple of reality surged through the courthouse like a shockwave. A whisper at first, one that rapidly evolved into a tremor of full-blown panic. A child had gone missing. Not just any child. Their child. Michael Corinthos had tried to maintain composure in the face of the unexpected. After all, he had learned to wear masks well over the years, practiced at concealing his grief, his fear, and his fury. But the moment the words registered, everything else evaporated. He rose from his seat as though pulled by an invisible force, the courtroom around him becoming a blur. The attorneys, the judge's gavel, the gasps from those in attendance, they no longer mattered. There was only one thought in his mind: his child was in danger. And nothing else would come before that. Leaving behind the courtroom drama and the silent gaze of Willow, Michael bolted toward the nearest exit. Seconds later, he was already behind the wheel, barreling through the streets of Port Charles toward the hospital, the last known location of the child. Every red light he ran felt like an eternity stolen from him. Every horn blaring in protest of his reckless speed only intensified the panic swelling in his chest. He was a father in freefall, spiraling into a nightmare he hadn't prepared for. Meanwhile, at the hospital, chaos reigned under a veil of controlled professionalism. Nurses whispered in hurried tones, security guards radioed in updates, and administrators scrambled to review surveillance footage. The child's disappearance had sent shockwaves through every corridor, with staff retracing steps, reviewing sign-in logs, and cross-checking every visitor who had entered pediatrics in the past hour. The tension was suffocating, punctuated only by the rhythmic beeping of monitors and the cries of other children oblivious to the unfolding crisis. When Michael arrived, his eyes scanned the chaotic front desk before locking onto a security official and demanding answers. His voice was raw, tinged with the kind of desperation that brooks no argument. Doctors and nurses quickly surrounded him, urging calm while offering fragmented pieces of information, useless scraps that only deepened the chasm of fear inside him. The child had vanished from a monitored room. A nurse had stepped away only briefly. A camera near the wing's exit had malfunctioned. These explanations felt more like excuses to Michael, who saw them as systemic failures in a hospital that was supposed to protect. Back in the courtroom, Willow was notified moments later. For a beat, she remained still, frozen in the moment, as if her body had yet to catch up with the enormity of what she had just heard. Then, in a sudden shift, her fight in court was rendered meaningless. She didn't wait for recess. Didn't ask permission. She simply walked out, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floors as she exited the courthouse, the courtroom's walls now nothing more than barriers keeping her from her child. By the time she arrived at the hospital, Michael had already scoured every floor, questioned every nurse, and turned the lobby into a command post of sorts. Their reunion in the middle of that chaos was less about shared grief and more about synchronized instinct. Whatever legal lines had been drawn between them earlier dissolved the moment their child became a victim. United by fear, they confronted hospital administration together, demanding real answers and immediate action. A hospital spokesperson issued a brief statement, confirming that a code pink had been activated and that all exits were being monitored. But there was no footage. No witnesses. No signs of forced entry. It was as if the child had simply vanished. As detectives arrived on the scene, including the seasoned Dante Falconeri, it became clear this was no random incident. The child hadn't wandered off. This was deliberate. This was targeted. And it raised the terrifying possibility that someone had orchestrated this abduction with meticulous precision. Dante promised they would leave no stone unturned, but he also issued a warning. In cases like this, the first few hours are crucial. After that, the odds of recovery dropped drastically. Suddenly, the custody battle that had consumed Willow and Michael for weeks now seemed like a ghost of a past life. Their attention was no longer focused on lawyers and judgments, it was centered solely on a child who had disappeared without a trace. As they sat together in the hospital's waiting area, surrounded by uniformed officers and medical staff, the two parents faced a grim new reality. Their fight was no longer against each other, but against an unseen enemy who had taken the most precious part of their world. Speculation began to swirl in hushed tones. Who would do this? Was this someone with a vendetta? A twisted attempt at revenge? Or perhaps someone from within the system, who had access to records, schedules, and routines. As these questions multiplied, so too did the possibilities, each more horrifying than the last. Michael's family mobilized behind him, with Carly launching into protective mode and Jason making quiet but powerful calls to his own network. Willow, meanwhile, reached out to Chase and Brooke Lynn, desperate for any insight, any suspicion that might point them toward a suspect. But even as resources were thrown at the crisis, one truth remained: the child was still missing. And every passing minute only deepened the darkness that now hovered over both Michael and Willow. In a cruel twist of irony, the day that was supposed to determine which parent would gain custody had turned into a shared nightmare. And for the first time in a long while, Michael and Willow were not adversaries, but allies, holding on to each other as they braced for what might come next. Whether their child would be found, whether their fractured relationship could withstand this trauma, and whether justice would come swiftly or painfully slow, those answers remained uncertain. But one thing was clear: Port Charles had just entered another chapter of heartbreak, and the Corinthos family would never be the same again.